Hello, welcome to the Prepared Mind channel. Welcome on YouTube, welcome on Patreon. This is the weekly wrap-up where I talk about whether or not shit is going to hit the fan. Are we getting closer or are we getting further? I'm going to do it a little bit different this time, this week, when we talk about things. So, what do I have in mind? Well, here we are. It's another big week, and it is a big week. I want to cover things a little differently. This week, we had the Kavanaugh situation examined, mulled over, digested. Various factions have used sophistry to pick it apart. But this is an explosive situation that we're facing, and it's also a very dangerous one. This week over at Patreon, which is only $2 a month if you want to hear what I have to say about what the fuck is going on a daily basis. The Kavanaugh situation is explosive. Now, if you're a feminist, you're worried about Roe v. Wade, and that in and of itself is a massive deal. But it's not as explosive as what's going on. Now, speaking of explosive and what's going on in our world, this week, precious metals tried taking off and were conged massively. Conged, killed, squashed, flattened, whatever you want to call it. They're being suppressed. But they've tried breaking out a few times and they're put back down. But that's okay. I'm not worried about that. The financial system is in dire straits, and yes, it's getting worse, and we're going to shit hits the fan zone. Economically, it's just happening. There are still huge undercurrents. And if you think about what an ocean is it looks placid on top, but underneath water is moving about, caused by various things. It's called an undercurrent. There are undercurrents in the financial market that we can't see or feel or detect unless you don't have to be in the know, you don't have to be an insider, you just have to learn what's going on. There are massive problems in Europe, in the EU. France, Spain, Italy, Germany, the biggest countries are in the biggest trouble. And it's just kind of glossed over. Here in the United States, the Dow hit an all-time high. It bounced back up as predicted, as understood, as part of the it's gonna come down system. Right? This whole concept is frustrating in a way because the people who are the permabulls, and God bless them, they do their thing, and they contribute to the bubble and the explosion that comes about every time. They believe it's a whole different system, as if everyone's learned their lessons, and they're not going to make the same mistakes again. Well, lo and behold, they do. They always have. You think they didn't learn their lessons in 1929? Well, they learned a lesson, but they didn't change their behavior. They've modified some things, played some games, but we're still having the problems. A massive, significant issue that is pushing us closer to shit hitting the fan this week is the bond market. And I know this is boring as hell to think about. The bond market, holy shit, man, what a fucking snoozer of a subject. It is a snoozer. That's why no one knows about it. No one pays attention to it, because it's a fucking snoozer. But it is the essence. It is the foundation of government finance and the way the system is propped up. Right? The 10-year bond is raised, been risen. It's been lifted, right? 15% in 1 week. And it's causing cracks to already appear. If you can't see them in the system, you can at least see them in the behavior of financial experts, the banking people, everybody. They're looking at it, and even down to the consumer. Because the cost of credit, the cost to do business, is getting more expensive. The cost to live is getting more expensive. See, it used to be that, well, you would mortgage a house and you would buy a car. And then it was, well, you finance a car, but you make cash purchases. And then it became, not only do you finance a house and finance a car, but you finance your month-to-month life with a credit card. And you try and manage debt instead of save wealth. You see, the system we've gone from, which is that of savings, to managing debt, is massive. And it's been done over a few generations, several generations, so people aren't aware of the change, the way people used to do business, the cost of goods. Because of all of the crap piled on top of it, the legal expenses, the financing expenses. Right? The cost of a house is outrageous because of that. And it's not just the house itself. It's everyone who built it, all the manufacturers who built the equipment and made the parts that go into what a house is. They're all playing the same game where they're financing everything. And all of this finance cost is added to the cost of the product. So a house, which should be $50,000 or less, something you could pay cash for after saving for 5 years, is now not $50,000 but $500,000. 9/10 of its cost is to service the system that underlies the cost of a house. The labor, the materials, the manufacturing, the transportation, the energy that goes into it is all financed. It's financed, and that's added to the cost. So now you can't afford to save money for a few years to buy something. Now you save money for a few years just to afford the down payment. And even that is wiped out now. Where are we going? Why are bonds important? Because that is the cost of financing. You don't buy a house. You don't buy a car. You don't even buy month-to-month expenses. You finance it all. And now the cost of that financing is going up. And you go, well, it's at 2%, John. And if it goes to 3%, who gives a shit? It's just 1 more percent. No, you see, the cost to finance, if it goes from $2 to $3, was just raised 50%. The cost to finance, if it goes from 2% to 4%, is raised 100%. So if your house, which is $500,000, 90% of which is the cost of finance, you have just raised that another 50%. So a $500,000 house now costs $750,000. By the time all the trickle-down effects get to the consumer, the buyer. And they have to turn around and finance a house through a mortgage. Same with automobiles. The cost of an automobile, about 90% of it is the cost of finance and the legal and the insurance and all the background, underhanded, undercurrent bullshit. The raw materials are nothing. The cost of manufacturing is nothing. The cost of human labor to build a car is really nothing. It's 10%. The other 90% is all the financing and legal and gimmickry underneath to get to the point where it can be assembled and sold to you. And then you turn around and finance the house. You turn around and finance the car. And even your month to month, because there's so little, absolutely little amount of disposable income after all of this fucking financing. Right? You've got to finance your month to month. And if we're going to raise the cost of that money, to raise the cost of products and goods and services by 50%, by raising the interest rate from 2 to 3, how about 3 to 4? How about 4 to 6, where it should be, right? Old time standards, 6%, 7%, 8% interest to do business. And you paid for everything through that, right? It was all financed that way. Now it's financed the other way. In other words, we're getting close to shit hitting the fan here because the rate is going up and they're having a hard time controlling it. For the last year, we've watched them try and keep that 10-year bond below, right? Down, down, down. Well, it is running away. It's running away from them. And it is an undercurrent that is going to become like an undertow, and it's just going to grab people. It's going to grab people and it's going to pull them down. Now, enough about the financial, are we getting closer to shit hitting the fan? Oh yeah, we are. Right? Everything looks great on the surface. Surface is calm, there's undercurrents, and they're whipping around in a frenzy. Well, let's take a look at some other undercurrents. Some other stuff, right? Other things that is shit hitting the fan quality. I talked about the purge in an earlier video, and I'm thinking you might, hopefully you get a taste or a flavor of what I meant when I talked about the purge and politics and what's coming. There is the chance of a political purge coming. Now, there's not a bunch of new American founding fathers, not yet. But we've been flirting with this very dangerous concept of a state of emergency, and our nation has been through it several times in the past. The very first Republican president was Abraham Lincoln, and I have zero respect for him. I know that's not a popular place to sit, but I haven't found anyone who really understands in the high academic levels what Lincoln did. I haven't found anyone that still respects him, not on that level. One of the things he did was suspend habeas corpus. He used war and emergency powers to forever change our nation. That was a long time ago. Now now that that was established and accepted by the Supreme Court, we had Franklin Delano Roosevelt do what? He used his power under emergency war powers to lock up people of Japanese descent, based solely on their race, and it was upheld in the Supreme Court. So it is, again, embedded political doctrine that this can be done. And I find it absolutely appalling. To suspend any portion of the Constitution for government expediency is a very dangerous business. It affects the nation and it affects lives. And we have had, right, since way back. I mean, if you want, you can go back to Lincoln, or you can go back to FDR, you can go back to Nixon. Anytime an emergency is declared and special powers are assumed by the president as the chief executive, we face the very real threat of losing more liberty and losing it permanently. Now, right now, Donald Trump is president. And everyone's applauding his effort to clean up the deep state, including me. I'm applauding the effort to clean up the deep state. But how that's done is incredibly scary, because it can be abused. Any power wielded by government is ripe for abuse. And if someone wants to argue that with you or me, argue that that's not the case, then they really are fools for believing how deadly dangerous that is. So Donald Trump is trying to clean up the deep state, trying to clean up the traitors. I mean, an example of that, an incredible example of this, is the fact that John McCain is dead, and his cohort, his kissing cousin, Lindsey Graham, is now the poster boy for the Republican Party, when those two used to be basically joined at the hip. So how could McCain, who is said to be killed, right? He was executed, eliminated, right? And none other than, what was it, Kasich, Governor Kasich said so, right? He was taken out. A lot of people believe that, yeah, he was tried through a military tribunal, probably at Guantanamo Bay, found guilty, and was executed. But Lindsey Graham, his cohort, not in all things, but in many, is now the poster boy and the good guy? How is that possible? Well, he turned state's evidence. He rolled over. He is now, right, what? He's the go-to guy. Right? He is basically the Trump bitch, in other words. And he got reminded of that when he gave Huma Abedin a big ol' hug, when Clark and Mad Dog Mattis stared him down like, what are you doing? You think you can still get to hug her? Right? It was very interesting. Are we getting closer to shitting the fan? Yes. Now here's where the rubber meets the fucking road. In the hearing with Kavanaugh, prior to all this Ford stuff, what happened between Lindsey Graham and Kavanaugh? There was an exchange, a discussion about emergency powers and military tribunals and the Constitution. Now, Kaz over at Fourth Dimension talked about this in a very fascinating, very sobering way earlier this week, where he talked about this extreme power being used and how everyone is trumpeting it, and they are loving it and thinking it's marvelous that Trump is using all of these superpowers behind the scenes with this Q thing to clean up the deep state. Like I said, I want the problems cleaned up, but it's the threat of abuse. What happens when that power is turned on the people? And it has been. The government reserves the right to do what? To use mind control techniques, propaganda. They have reserved for themselves the right to enrich themselves at the expense of the people. As in other words, we always pay the bill for everything. Financially, we are financing what the government is doing to us. But this exchange between Lindsay, this set of questions back and forth with Brett Kavanaugh, he's asking them, how do you think, where do you stand on superpowers, if you want to use the expression, that the president is using and can use, or whether you want to say the government, but it's the president. It's extremely sobering to think about the suspension of all of your rights if the government considers you an enemy of the state. Right? Now, you could go, well, look, just like you, John, I'm a patriot. I love my country. I pay my taxes. I'm not happy with how things are going. But still, I want to bitch and complain about it. It's my right. Well, it is my right. It's your right. It's all of our right. But what if the government decides, through some superpower of theirs, right, to declare a political party or a political thought to make you an enemy? That's how dangerous this is. Now, I'm really not worried about Trump to the extent that I'm worried about people on the left. People on the left, they're communists. They already believe that if you don't believe as them, you should die. So where's the threat? This power that Trump wants to use and is using and is likely to continue to use can be turned against us. Let's just say the Democrats win this midterm election. Let's just assume that a Democrat, commie, socialist is elected president in 2 more years. That superpower, those extra constitution suspending powers of the president can be turned on us, and we can be declared enemies of the government, not enemies of the Constitution, because the government doesn't talk about the Constitution except to say that they're going to suspend it. They don't care about the Constitution. They care about continuity of government, power of government, and if the government is once again controlled at the next level, the next ratcheted up highness of wild political subversive craziness, we could have in 2 years a new system of government under a Democrat with super constitutional powers and declare you and me to be enemies of the state, and you and I subject to special military tribunal powers, and that the judge, the bench, they can apply the rules that they create outside and beyond the scope of the Constitution. They can say that their rules, their special political rules, apply to you and apply to me. That is the threat we face with this. It's not the power itself, it's the abuse of it. It's the politicization. It is the partisanation, right? They will turn it into a partisan regime. They can declare martial law. And we've been worried about this for decades, I know. Martial law is coming, martial law is coming, martial law is coming. We are on the brink of dealing with that right now. We could have a problem. We can have an exercise go wrong. We can have an act of blatant terrorism occur. And the government can. It can do what? The government can declare, right, an emergency. We could have it. We could have a purge attempt during this election season. That is, wide, partisan-based murders and destruction of private property as a result of the election happening, or as an after occurrence, as in the election didn't go their way, so they're going to have an extreme response from the left, and the government can declare martial law. We are in a very real place and facing that. Kavanaugh being appointed to the Supreme Court, and it looks like he's passed, looks like he's going to make it. He agrees with this notion, this thought, this concept that the government can declare you no longer a citizen with albeit trimmed down, haircutted constitutional rights through the Bill of Rights. They can just fucking suspend those. Or they can declare you an enemy of the state and say they don't exist for you anymore. That is the very real threat. And it just doesn't threaten you and me. It just doesn't threaten one partisan side or the other. It threatens the very existence of the Constitution itself. If the Constitution, which is the foundation and authorization for our government, can itself be suspended, then the government exists outside of its control. In other words, the lunatic then runs the asylum. It's an out-of-control creation that cannot be limited because it can pronounce itself sovereign and supreme to the very law that authorized it in the first place. And it is sovereign and supreme to you and I, the very people that authorized the Constitution, which created the government. It goes God, people, Constitution, government. What the government wants to do is say we're above the people and we're even above the Constitution itself, claiming for itself that there is no God and that they themselves are the gods, the supreme power. It is a very scary proposition. I'm glad Kaz talked about it, and I'm glad that Lindsey Graham had that discussion with Kavanaugh. But the discussion with Kavanaugh frightened the Democrats so much that they went into an all-out political assassination of him in an effort to destroy his character so that he is not appointed to the Supreme Court, and that someone else that doesn't think the way he does is. The president has incredible power already. All presidents have. But they want this other power to remain in place, which is the power to declare anybody an enemy of the state under special war powers, authorization edicts, or executive orders. We have stepped out of the shadows. We, meaning the government, has stepped out of the shadows with its opinion, its belief system about its supreme powers. And it has now pronounced them. It was done in front of God and the world, right there in Congress, right there in this hearing, this confirmation hearing. But most people don't realize the gravity, the magnitude of that discussion between the now converted Lindsey Graham and Kavanaugh. As I said, Lindsey Graham used to be a complete shit stirrer, right? A complete shit heel, depending on how you want to think about it, right? And now he's a good guy. Now he's carrying the water for President Trump. And again, I want to see the problem cleaned up, but it's the very real threat or the consequences of the use of this extreme power that can lead us to shit it's the fan next week, next month, next year, or in the next administration. The consequences of politics is now no longer, are we going to have higher taxes or lower taxes? The consequences of whoever wins elections on the federal level is now the difference between going into constitutional crisis or having a pseudo-constitutional crisis that people are just limitedly aware of on a subliminal basis. And it's going to rest in the hands of partisans. That is, a political party of one persuasion or another. And depending on what side you land on, very well could affect the way the rest of your life is lived, or in some cases, not lived at all. Right? Being a patriot is a matter of perspective. It's a matter of perspective. After the Bolshevik Revolution, the patriots were those who killed all of the bourgeoisie and the aristocrats in Russia, which became the Soviet Union. Right? History is written by the winners. The patriots are always the winners. Everyone who wins gets to call themselves a patriot. Right? I believe in freedom. That's the side of patriotism, or the flavor that I uphold, that I believe in, that I protect, that I talk about. Yeah, we've got political problems and we're getting to shit it's the fan. Yeah, we've got fucking trade problems. We got military problems. We got funding problems as a government, as a world. We have social decay and falling apart, and Kavanaugh is being looked at that way or viewed through the lens of feminism, which is a control plank of socialism. Yeah, he's dangerous in that way. But Trump will appoint anybody who is willing to do what is most important to Trump. Now, Roe v. Wade, some people say, that's settled. They're never going to reopen that can of worms. We got to keep this nation unified. Fucking unified? Are you kidding me? We are far from unified. And turning over Roe v. Wade is not going to make things any worse. It's just going to make things very fucking apparent. What do I mean by that? Not worse versus apparent? We're already divided. Pro-abortion people are pro, anti are anti. Pro-life is pro-life, and pro-death is pro-death. We're already fucking divided, but if they turn over Roe v. Wade, it's just going to be apparent because of the wailing and gnashing of teeth that will follow. They want extra constitutional powers. They want these special powers accepted. They want the Supreme Court to continue to uphold this belief that the government is superior to the very Constitution and people that have authorized it. That's what they want. You know, in law, they're very careful about the rule of perpetuities. That is, creating something that lives on perpetually. In every case, they want to deny you the ability to have a perpetual document, contract, right? Existence, corporation. They control that and regulate it, but government itself is out of control and acts in defense of itself first and in perpetuity. We are getting closer to shit hitting the fan. And as we get closer to this election, we're going to see more violence, more threats. This week, you bet, ricin, which is a biological agent, that's poisonous and causes catastrophic failure of the internal and vital organs, was mailed to Mattis, Richardson, and also to the White House. Is that a subtle sign or is that an attempt? I think it's a subtle sign. But it's also an attempt. It's designed as terror, whether it affected or killed anybody or not. It's designed to terrorize and cause people to change their behavior in order to avoid that kind of retribution, that kind of threat. If they're willing to use that threat now on the highest office holders, the most powerful people in the Pentagon, do you think for a second that those people that had that ricin would hesitate to use it on the very people themselves? Right? Wars are won, not always on the battlefield, but sometimes by killing the civilians that support them. Ask those who died, if you could, and those that lived, if they're still around, in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The rest of the country was in horror at the drop of 2 very small atomic weapons. And Japan crumbled right there and gave up in World War II because of not victories or losses on the battlefield, but rather the civilian casualties. The control and constraint and use of the people as weapons and pawns is something that communists and terrorists are more than willing to do. They sent a message to the Pentagon and to the White House, but they are holding us, you and I, hostage. We are the extortion ransom that is being shown to Trump. We are in very, very perilous times. I'm getting information from my military contacts, I'm getting information from my financial contacts, and I'm nobody. I'm at the way end of a branch of information, and I talk to just a few of you people on here every day and every week. Right? The information is out there. You just have to look for it. Don't believe what I say. Don't make decisions based on what I say. Do your own research. Look it up. Those in the know who really know, who are much closer to the palisades of power and decision making than I am, they're talking too. And I get a ton of information from them, just listening to them. Get prepared. Food, water, shelter, clothing, medicine, means of self-defense. Get a plan, because chance favors the prepared mind. Without it, we are all doomed. And we need to understand the threat is very real. And a victory today against our enemies could very well turn into a defeat against us tomorrow, using the same rules. It is explosive and dangerous power that is being exerted and discussed. Right? And it is its implementation that presents amazing results. And by amazing, I don't mean amazing good. It's like saying great and terrible. They are going to be great results. But that amount of power is horrifying and scary. Much like a nuclear weapon is a horrifying amount of power. And just possessing it and not using it is enough to cause people to change their behavior. The president holds that power. He hasn't used it to the extent that all of us have seen it yet, but it is being wielded. It is very scary. Get prepared, because if these idiots out here decide to go scorched earth, that is, kill people wholesale fashion in an effort to hide themselves, or cause irreparable harm and damage to our infrastructure, to our financial system, in an effort to retaliate against the deep state being locked up, they can cause shit to hit the fan. That's enough for this week. There'll be more coming next week. Fucking strap yourself in, tighten your belt. It's gonna get wild. You may not see it all above the surface, but there are undercurrents. I'll talk to you all later. Godspeed and God bless to everyone, and Semper Fi.